Tests demonstrate that only 15% of 8th graders, 15, know anything about U.S. history. Fortunately, their mathematical ignorance renders the embarrassing fact beyond their comprehension. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. We start today with a look at the nation's report card, and it turns out that only 15% of 8th graders have any knowledge of American history at all. I mean, civics, history, dates, places, names. It's actually worse than it's ever been in America since we measured this stuff.
And it really isn't that surprising when you think about the lack of attention that has been given to history, because it's all about reading and math, and we know that they're performing at only about 35% there. So 15% actually makes sense. But we're finding out that the nation's report card, the National Center for Education Statistics, revealed just this past week that only 15% of them, 8th graders, know anything or being, I guess, proficient in anything with U.S. history.
Yeah, what gets me about this is, so a lot of time is being spent talking about America in these public school classrooms. None of it is devoted to actual history.
There you go.
None of it is devoted to geography, history. We're not memorizing state capitals or dates. We're not talking about how unlikely a country this was. We're not talking about what a republic is and how remarkable a form of government it is vis-a-vis the rest of the governments that had existed before this, how unique. We don't talk about American exceptionalism anymore. We don't talk about the fact that free markets and freedom and liberty are at the heart of what makes America great. We talk a lot about America in the public schools, but we talk about none of that stuff. This survey proves it. 85% of 8th graders can tell you nothing meaningful, and that means something. If they can't tell you meaningful, basic facts about the country, then you know they have no ability to talk about what makes the country, how it works, what makes it remarkable, what's unusual about it. So what are they talking about? All day and all night in schools. It's social justice, left-wing activism. Your kids are getting plenty about America. They're learning that it's racist, sexist, bigoted, and homophobic. You're learning that America is responsible for the world's problems. You're learning that America alone, of all the nations of the world, your kids are learning, own slaves. You're learning that slavery is a peculiarly and particularly American problem that hasn't gone away. You're learning that to be white in this country, these kids, to be a white American is to be privileged and toxic. To be masculine, male, is to be toxic. You're learning all this at the expense of this other stuff. I guarantee you, if you gave kids a social justice test as opposed to an American history test, 85% would have been able to tell you why America's a rotten country. This is how we're educating your kids in the so-called public schools.
And this isn't a new problem. We've been so woke here for the past how many decades, but we have just in the most recent years, it's plunged even more. If you take a look at 2014, that last data, it was at 18%. So in 2014, 18% of our 8th graders were at or above proficiency. And so now it's ticking down another 3%. And where are we going to be in another 4 years when they do actually give us the results from these 2014, 2018, now that it'll be 2022? When are we going to finally just get down to we don't even know what the name of our country is?
That's by 8th grade. What happens when they get into high school and they start taking advanced placement U.S. history, which is all about race, class, and gender, right? Or what happens when they go to universities, right? Where your radical left-wing universities focus on race, class, and gender as the only lenses through which we view history.
And since history is my field of my first field of love, this hits home with me because I see what has been happening through and through with these schools as the kids get older and older. It's their knowledge about race, class, gender just ticks up, and their actual knowledge about any rights, liberties, freedoms just goes down. They don't know anything that is happening. And at that level, at the 8th grade level, you should be able to name all 50 states.
And spell them correctly.
And I personally witnessed how bad the students were over and over, and I had to be a repetition thing. And they didn't even have to spell the names. They had to, there was a number on the state and just match it up, and the kids couldn't do it after we did it once a week, every week, for 6 weeks. Still kids could name 2025.
According to the test, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP scores, which are the gold standard. This is not right wing or left wing. This is the gold standard of how you measure kids' behavior, understanding. According to the test, students' knowledge and understanding of U.S. history in all its complexity, its major themes, periods, events, people, ideas, and turning points. That's what they should be getting. This assessment examines students' understanding of historical chronology, dates, differing perspectives across time, and their grasp of historical facts and context. Average scores in the United States history dropped 4 points, as Katie pointed out, from 267 to 263 on a scale of 500, right? The results are another indication that the achievement of already low-performing students has been declining relative to higher-performing schools. So not only are we, despite all the promises of the federal takeover education, despite all of the touting of Common Core and the effective new ways we were going to teach a kid, we're going to get rid of literature and poetry and art, we're going to teach your kids facts. When it comes to history, they know no facts. All they know is one continuous narrative. This is the Howard Zinnification of your history programs, right? Carried to the logical conclusion. We're only going to look at American history through radical Marxist socialist lenses to tell you how wicked and awful it is.
And you can tell that they are wanting to rewrite the history, and that's why you get the Howard Zins, and that's what's being assigned. Again, mom and dad, take a look at what your students are being assigned, even at the junior high level, at the 8th grade level. If they're bringing home Howard Zinn, you know that this is a rewriting of history, not actually what happened.
And a new survey has been released recently that demonstrated that young Americans are the least patriotic Americans in the country. The younger the demographic in America today, the less likely they are to take seriously or even love their country. Now you know why. The younger generations and the younger kids have no use for the country. They don't understand it at all, and that's the problem.
Up next, we're going to talk about a new production of 1776 featuring an all-female LGBT cast. Well, based on what we just learned about before the break, that 15% of 8th graders know anything about history, it doesn't surprise me that we have a Harvard director who's making the musical 1776 with an all-LGBT cast. And it probably just doesn't raise a question at all with anyone outside of the Harvard community. The musical was actually written 50 years ago for Broadway, and it basically tells the struggle of the summer of 1776 and what our founding fathers are going to do with debating about independence from Britain. So Diane Paulus is the practice of theater professor, I don't even know what that means, in Harvard's English department, and she's going to have a cast comprised entirely of female, non-binary, trans, and genderqueer individuals. And the cast features multiple representations of gender, race, and ethnicity that allow this revival of 1776 to more broadly reflect today's America, our America.
And now you understand the first story we told you about, right? Why is it that 85% of American school kids don't know? This is criminal. They don't know. It's not that they understand American history and rejected it. It's not that they understood the struggles of the founding fathers during the colonial period and what they had to overcome. That's not there. They don't have it. And you see what these clown shows are doing at Harvard. They're taking the story and they're casting, as they said themselves, right? Non-binary, female. So the only people you won't see are people who look like the founding fathers. The only people who will not be represented to a group of young children, young college kids who've been educated not to even know who they are. This is what you're going to see. And so what's the purpose of history for progressives? It is not to teach you what happened. It is not to let you know the truth. It is to reflect what progressive thinks today, right? This is what progressives think today, that if we had a fair and just world, this country would have been founded only by lesbian, gay, transgender, and queer folk, right? They're the only models fit for any adulation. And we didn't give them their due 250 years ago. So we're just going to take Jefferson, Adams, Madison, and the whole crew and remove them because these kids wouldn't know what they looked like anyway, and replace them with a version of America that leftist, socialist, progressives think is acceptable. So it's not just ignoring history. It's not just lying to kids about history. It is rewriting history now from the perspective of a group that is so tiny and so divisive that this now is the only normal way to do history for our kids.
According to them, this adaptation will re-examine. They're not saying rewrite, they're saying re-examine this pivotal moment in American history.
Can I ask you, When was it examined? When were the 8th graders, the 6th graders, the 9th graders, when did they examine what actually happened?
So how can you re-examine something if you haven't examined it to begin with?
It's not re-examining, it's rewriting.
And in this pivotal moment in American history, and you're already going off of it being a musical from 50 years ago, so what they took their own liberties to make it fit the musical. So the accuracy already is in question, but now you're going to go and make it even worse because you're going to have all female, non-binary, trans, and genderqueer individuals cast. And according to them, they have reportedly begun rehearsing through Zoom, so they can get together on the internets, with the ART confirming that the musical will play as a part of its 2020-2021 season.
For hundreds of years, hundreds if not thousands of years, we've had actors playing roles.
Yes.
And did it matter if they were Catholic or Protestant? Did it matter if they were Christian or Jew, the actors? Does it matter? Does it matter when you watch Shakespeare, who the actors are sleeping with when they're not acting? No. Welcome to the brave new world of progressive art as political agitprop, where the only thing that matters about these actors and actresses is their queerness. It doesn't even matter necessarily if they can sing, right? If they can't sing, it's probably even better. If they're off key, it's probably even better because it more foregrounds their gender difference, right? So you see what's happened here. This is now the death of art, too. It's not just the death of history, because in artistic representation, the job of an actor is to lose themselves into the part, right? To bring the person playing Jefferson isn't trying to point out what Jefferson would have done or said or how he would have acted if he were queer, right? It was to give you a sense of what Jefferson actually did and thought. But now what you got to do, by casting this way, you're making sure that the individual personality, and even more superficial, the sexuality of the individual playing the role overrides and completely effaces whatever was left about Thomas Jefferson. This is not a re-examination. This is not a rewriting. This is not making the founding look more like today. This is hijacking American history, distorting the truth, and lying.
Well, Paulus said in a press release that I have been overwhelmed by the compassion, humanity, and unstoppable creativity expressed by our company of 1776, who have come together from across the country for our virtual workshop. Their resilience has infused me with the hope for the future of theater and this time of uncertainty.
What does any of that have to do with the period you're talking about? Congratulations, they're queer actors. As if there aren't any of those in Hollywood to begin with. The fact that they have hijacked our history is criminal. $60,000 a year to go to Harvard.
A shocking number of illegals are attending our American universities. Here's my shocked face.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most unshocking shocked face I've ever been shocked with.
So Campus Reform highlighted a new report from the New American Economy, which reports that about 450,000 illegal immigrant students are in colleges and universities across the nation, and that makes up about 2% of the overall student population. Now, NAE called itself a bipartisan research and advocacy organization fighting for smart federal, state, and local immigration policies that help grow our economy and create jobs for all Americans, just so everyone's aware. The group's mission involves revealing the positive value of immigrant contributions to the American economy. Now, when we take a look at this 450,000 illegal immigrant students, only 216,000 of them are actually eligible for DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So that's not a good statistic to have. Among those who are even DACA eligible, 9 out of 10 of them, 89% of them, arrived when they were anywhere from 0 to 12 years old. And the rest of them came as adolescents up to 16. And among illegal immigrants enrolled at colleges across the country who are not eligible for DACA, nearly half of them, 47%, arrived before age 12, while 39 came from anywhere between ages 13 to 21. So you're looking at all these statistics and the breakdown of who's coming in and who's going to the universities. It's pretty shocking.
Shocking isn't the word. It's time to get your mind around this, America. When it comes to borders, we're not fighting to keep control of our borders. We now are an open border country. I mean, you can come here as illegal aliens, and I'm going to use that word because it's perfectly constitutionally ready, right? It's illegal aliens, right? They are alien citizens, alien non-citizens who came to this country illegally, right? Yeah. Is that an accurate portrayal?
That's an accurate.
Go ahead and call me having triggered you. Go ahead and write to the show.
Microaggression.
And talk about it's a macroaggression, right? How dare you?
That's a good point.
One of the reasons we have open borders now is because the left has succeeded in not letting you use the actual language to talk about what's happening here. And the fact that you can illegally enter this country, which is still a federal crime, right? You can illegally enter this, and you immediately get a driver's license.
Yep.
And you can go to school. And get this, moms and dads, many of these illegal aliens who are attending public colleges are getting in-state tuition, which you can't get. Your kid wants to go to UCLA and you live in Minnesota, he's going to pay a lot more money because he's an out-of-state student. Don't ask me why, by the way. If you're living in one state and want to go to school in another state, you're going to pay a hell of a lot more if you're a boring old white American. But if you cross the border illegally and pick any American state from the state of Chihuahua where you came from, you get in-state tuition.
Well, according to the statistics, 19 states and D.C. allow that all undocumented students who meet the state residency requirements, they get the in-state tuition, regardless of their DACA status, by the way, regardless of that.
Yeah, you don't even have to be on track to becoming a citizen.
But yes. Now, also reported was that undocumented adult learners, 14% of them are over the age of 22, and none of them are eligible for DACA within the universities right now. So 14% of our undocumented adult learners in our universities right now are over the age of 22. None of them are eligible for DACA, but they're probably falling into the residency, so they're probably getting the in-state tuition and everything else.
It's a lot more than even those 19 states.
Exactly.
Right?
Okay. And if you take a look, now if you look at undergraduate versus graduate school in terms of who's going, 90% of them are in undergrad and 10% are in graduate school as well. But the statistic that I'm looking at is that 82% of illegals are attending the public colleges. So this is where really it starts to hit the taxpayer when you talk about the public university versus the private. So 82% attend the public colleges, and among DACA, the eligible 84% are attending the public, and only 16% are going to the private. But this is hitting you in your pocketbook whether you like it or not, or know about it or not.
Of course, and you're paying for it. And this goes back and explains the earlier stories. Do you understand now, Mom and Dad America, why we're not teaching American history? Because that's the question. I mean, I gave you the overlying socialist reasons we're not. But when you are flooding the schools with barely English-speaking kids who have to be educated, and to teach American history to all of these illegal Mexicans, well, that's just terrible. What about their history? What about their culture? We go to full multiculturalism, you teach them about the history of everything else, not America, and you pretend like America has no culture at all.
It's time for the Instant Classic, today featuring Brunelleschi's Dome at the Florence Cathedral. So we've all heard of the Sistine Chapel, but have you seen Filippo Brunelleschi's Dome within the Florence Cathedral? Because I had not. But I'd like to see it in person someday because I took a look at some photos and they are beautiful. The construction is simply magnificent. At the time of its design, it was actually the largest dome in the world. In 1296, you have to imagine the competition. The dome was 150 feet wide and 180 feet above the ground. And so there were some architectural challenges. And it wasn't until 1418 when this competition that they had to see, who's going to build this dome, that in 1418 was when it was actually announced that they were going to do it, and 2 years later it began in the hands of Brunelleschi.
Yeah, you make a great point, Mike. Show the picture of Brunelleschi. There he is in the first image there. You can see one of the great foundational geniuses of the Renaissance. Everybody knows Da Vinci and Michelangelo, the mutant ninja turtle version, right? Everybody knows Raphael and Donatello, but not enough people recognize the genius of Brunelleschi, one of the great architects. He actually set architects. He pulled architecture, the great achievements of architecture, from the Middle Ages and from the Roman period, and put them right square in the Renaissance. In Florence, they had this wonderful building. Show the site. Imagine that beautiful building without the dome. And for a long time, there was no dome because nobody knew how to build it. And so this is a pivotal time. The early 1400s, the Renaissance is cresting high. The Renaissance is emulating the great works of the masters of Greece and Rome in painting and sculpture. But no one had yet been able to do it in architecture, which is, very fraught with difficulties. It's very mathematically driven. As the ancient treatises on mathematics were becoming more well-known, more building was being done. And if you go back to the image there, you imagine that building without the dome. Brunelleschi, there was a huge civic contest in Florence to see who could do this, and many people came forward and gave ideas and estimates about this, tried to argue ways to have it done. It was shocking that the way that Brunelleschi did this was pretty staggering. It was finally completed in 1436, and the architectural achievement, if you get a chance to go and look a little bit deeper in this, Mom, this is a great opportunity, Mom, if you're home with the kids, to incorporate a little math education with a little artistic education. Go ahead and look up the specifics of how Brunelleschi found a way to construct this dome. At the time, it was the largest dome in the world. Prior to this, it was the Pantheon in Rome. About 1,400 years earlier, the Pantheon had been built. And this was a huge step forward. In fact, up until about 2006, this was the biggest dome in the world, because in 2006, in India, a bigger one was built for a temple, the Global Vipassana Pagoda, which is twice as large as the previous largest stone dome.
Well, I would still say this one's more beautiful, because at the time, could you imagine, that's what I like to do anytime I look at the history and look at architecture. Put yourself in their place at that time with the tools they had, the knowledge they had, the people they had to help them, to be able to create something so beautiful like that in 150 feet wide, 180 feet above ground, to be able to even conceptualize that, much less make it happen, is simply remarkable.
Well, and there were no hydraulics, there were no electric cranes, there were no pneumatic drills. I mean, all of this had to be done by really old-fashioned hoist and joist technology. It was really amazing. Mike, show the view of the inside of the dome. And of course, the painters they got together and they just paint. You can see the oculus there at the very top where the light comes in. You just get a sense of that, the eye, the opening. But you can see all the beautiful frescoes, all the beautiful painting that had been done on the inside.
And isn't that done by the scenes from Dante? I believe
partially.
Some of the scenes are. So, I mean, if you ever read any Dante, then to be able to go there and look at that is just, it's simply remarkable. And you could just sit there and probably stare at it for hours and still be like, oh.
And Dante, of course, was another great, about a generation, 100 years before Brunelleschi, you had Dante writing the Divine Comedy. Brunelleschi there's nothing more beautiful than coming over the hills of Toscana, over the hills of Italy there, and in the twilight coming down over those hills into Florence. And you see that beautifully illuminated dome with all of its grandeur. One of the great architectural wonders of the world, especially given how many people had put their minds to trying to get it done.
All right, that's going to wrap it up for Tuesday. As always, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And if you have a question for our Friday Q&A, visit freedomproject.com/askduke to send it our way. Otherwise, just send us a message on social media. But before we go, we need to wrap things up with the fun fact of the day. April showers bring May flowers can actually be dated back to the 16th century as part of a poem by Thomas Tusser. Sweet April showers do spring May flowers. But there is another version that's in the prologue of the Canterbury Tales from 200 years prior to that.
April with her showers sweet, right?
I knew you were going to do that.
My first thought when you brought up the 16th
I knew
century,
it.
My first thought was to go back to Chaucer.
I knew you were
right,
going to
as
do
the
it.
Pilgrims were beginning to set off on their way, and the beautiful showers of April, right? What do you have there? So great minds think alike. Well, at least mine does. I don't know about yours. For Freedom Project Media, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Until next time, stay Toscana, my friends.